welcome to this special Zoom event in Berry College's Creative Writing Reading Series, a poetry reading by Robyn Schiff. For those Berry College students here, for cultural events credit, we'll post a link during the Q&A following the reading, which will take you to a short survey to complete within 24 hours. Tonight's reading is sponsored by the Georgia Poets Initiative, a program of the Georgia Poetry Circuit, which is housed at Berry College. The Georgia Poets Initiative is a registry of Georgia's best poets who have each generously agreed to give one reading per academic year at a Georgia college or university for no stipend. It is with my deepest gratitude and great pleasure that I introduce to you now one of my favorite poets, Robyn Schiff. Robyn Schiff is professor of creative writing at Emory University and co-editor of Canarium Books, a small press dedicated to the publication of books of poetry. Born in New Jersey, Professor Schiff earned her MFA at the University of Iowa Writers' Workshop, as well as an MA at the University of Bristol. Her book-length poem, Information Desk, an Epic, is forthcoming from Penguin, and she is the author of 3 previous poetry collections: Worth, Revolver, a finalist for the Penn Award, and A Woman of Property, which was not only a finalist for the Los Angeles Times Book Prize, but was named a Best Book of the Year by the New Yorker and the Chicago Tribune, and was an editor's choice at the New York Times. A Woman of Property begins in what seems safe, stable territory, with an allusion to the classic children's book, Peter Rabbit. Everyone has a cousin, Benjamin Bunny. Peter said a walk would do him good. But quickly, the scrim darkens. Peter did not enjoy himself anymore. He never would again, we are told, as we begin to witness how the domestic, the traditional theater of safety, even in its most benign everyday particulars, so easily slips into concrete anxieties and existential terrors. Of the speaker's home, she tells us, the earth wants the house back, warning us we will smell its need in her basement if we visit, when tornado sirens roll exultant maybes. Of the garden, we see brooding lettuces and their falcon heads, weeds winding shut the coppice gate in a terrible inversion of the jaws of life. The machine, the clematis in her yard, unwinds up along its own concertina wire. The bedroom the pregnant speaker isolates herself to when she's sick with H1N1, the swine flu in the 2009 pandemic, offers no peace, as her thoughts about how she will allow no one to touch her quickly take her to the biblical tale about casting out demons. Infection is a hazard of mercy, she tells us, that she will not transmit, as Legion transcribed from the mouth of error into his body and sent it into a herd of swine. Even the nursery for her new baby, its new rocking chair with its slow industrial rattle, is no retreat, for all is connected through art and anxiety. And this is embodied in Schiff's form as much as in her content, through a complex and gorgeous counterpoint of her sentences' sinuous syntax played against the line, often in intricate syllabic stanzas. As this attraction to syllabic forms, where the line length is determined by the number of syllables, the line syllable count varied within a stanza, but mirrored across stanzas, Schiff's 20th century literary ancestors include Marianne Moore. Another is Sylvia Plath, with her vivid, biting imagery. But Robyn Schiff's poems are entirely her own, and brilliantly so. A Woman of Property, in short, is simply one of the best books of American poetry published in this 21st century. We had planned to have this reading in person, And it remains our hope that post-COVID, we will have another opportunity to do so. In lieu of the live book sale that we would typically be doing following this reading, we now have signed copies of A Woman of Property and Robyn's other books on display and for sale at the Shipyard bookstore. I very much look forward to the day we can gather with this amazing poet in person. But tonight, it is my true honor and joy now to welcome to this virtual space, Robyn Schiff.
Thank you. I'm so overwhelmed and emotional and moved by that introduction. I should have turned my camera off because I really just want to weep here. I should have clicked it off, but you were stuck watching me hear that, and thank you. I'm so honored to be reading for Berry College and for you, Sandy, and to all of the friends in the audience, some of whom I got to meet a couple of years ago when I was on campus at another reading, and so many people I look forward to meeting when it's safe to do so. And I've learned there are some old friends in Iowa City here too, which is just very delightful to me. Now that we are no longer local and we broadcast everywhere, there's a whole different kind of reach that I find a little bit sinister, except when it's warm like it is right now. Sandy, thank you so much for having me. Of course, I wish we were in person. The being in community with you in particular is so gratifying and so delightful. When I moved from Iowa to become a Southern poet, as I am now, you were the very first person to welcome me. And I'm very grateful for that and for being in community with you. Books are nice, but community is much more important. So I thank you for that. I'm going to read just a couple of poems from the book that Sandy described. I'm on to new work now, but I do want to start with a sort of a nod to the work that I was doing some years ago. And I'm going to start by reading the poem called Gate that Sandy so generously told me what it means. Now I know. Thank you. Gate. Everyone has a cousin Benjamin Bunny. Peter said a walk would do him good, the edge of the wood. Peter did not enjoy himself anymore. He never would again. The brooding lettuces and their falcon hoods, the coppice gate wound shut by weeds, the jaws of life trying to keep it closed tight, but anyone can climb it. As a child, I played on a gate in a neighborhood park that swung of itself and sounded like the distress call of a rabbit. I stood on the bottom slat and backed in and out of the air. I'll never get out of here. The gate was pure folly without fencing on either side. Greek tragedy staged around a doorway. The imagination strains to enter. I was raised in an aisle seat with an eye line of an actor about to come through from behind it. Melodramatic onions grew wild. I cried and cried until someone said, it's okay to cry. It means the onions are fresh. Every dream begins with a threshold. Meet in the driveway where dogs tip the garbage. Where's your mouth? There is a whistle you can buy that makes the sound of a rabbit screaming. Hunters use to call whatever they want out of the thicket because everything they wants rabbit for dinner. Move your hand along the shaft to change the call from Jack to Cottontail and back again. Once you see them nose out of the interior at your bidding, what stops you from sounding every single day, all day, the shrill imagined rabbit's canned terror? You can do it with a reed of grass. Cup your hands. Everything alive is listening. I knew a hunter who could do a spot on fawn whose suffering would bring a doe into the open every time. He didn't want a doe though, he wanted a buck. Here's what I can't stand to acknowledge. When bucks hear the sound of the fawn my friend makes with his mouth, they come too, not in pity, but in lust, so badly they want the doe drawn by the yearning of a fawn in need of her. Everything is within range suddenly, and who am I to judge? He mounts her relief and spring comes. No, he takes a bullet. I was caught up in theatrics and forgot whose theater this is. Next poem I'm going to read is called Lion Felling a Bull. And it takes me to the Metropolitan Museum of Art, which is where the artwork that I'm describing in the poem lives. But many years ago, when I was just a baby poet in my 20s, I worked at the Met at the information desk. And this is the poem that reminded me that I'd always meant to write about that time in my life and what my whole new book is about. So I'll read you this poem and then maybe one other from A Woman of Property, and then I'll tell you a little bit about the work that I'm doing now. Lion Felling a Bull. I came upon a fragment, one anterior lion felling one anterior bull. I was in a museum, so can't call it life, but here I felt my life come down upon my life and have something to say about the continual downhill grade of the path from the ancient marble quarry, the dark marble here was quarried from. First with form and then with stone, I came in love upon a fragment and should have loved the pressure most. I have a mother and a quarry. I quarreled with my father the day my son was born and am the father now. As a girl, I flipped over my handlebars flying down a different hill every time. I had a childhood friend named Jill and an anti-carjacking device called a club I policed myself with by thinking hard of my membership in and a keen sense of the end of belonging. I drove my car into a house, my house into the earth, and I'm grinding the earth into hell. I want to be more true to the material world, the wild upon the bull, the chisel upon the wild, but it's either true or it isn't. How can I be more than what I am? I want to stop identifying with the caliper or the marble, the lion, its marble mane, or the meat the lowing cow watched its mate become and be the altering heat again. I stood before the fragment and asked, what doesn't want to be whole? I've never found fragmentation as beautiful as objects that survived the fall of civilization intact, half lion felling, half bull. I feel pressure in the forms to conclude, a coming storm, electricity in the air, an intention, but whose? I saw crudeness in the wear of the marble and finished in mind with the crudeness of something itself unfulfilled, and then something else was exhumed in Athens. All I needed to see was an inch of hindquarter of lion or bull to love the world to its conclusion, but a second front entirely is forming. Mythology is sweet, but husbandry is history. The head of another lion rises out of the gridded pit, having nothing to do with symmetry, a colossal miscounting of lions felling a sole bull. Two irreducible lions made of the same material as me will come upon me, and the pressure that made them makes more of them than it makes of me. The pressure that makes more of them than it ever made of me. Out of proportion, out of the quarry, great pressure is forming, a thunder. I feel a great pressure positioning me. It has no regard. And I'll finish looking at this book with one more poem. This poem is called 4th of July, and it responds to the discovery of the so-called God particle at the CERN lab on that day. I remember a performance of Antigone in which she threw herself on the floor of the universe and picked up a piece of dust. Is that the particle? It startled me. Was it scripted, directed, driven? I am a girl, Antigone. I have a sister. We love each other terribly. I am a woman of property, the milk of the footlights, the fold of the curtain. I remember a performance of Antigone. She stooped. There was a wild particle. It was glorified by my distance. I heard the hooves of the dust, the ticking of the script, calibrating oblivion. I saw the particle hanging, and Antigone needed something to do with her hands. And she did it. I wrote that book under the spell of my pregnancy with my son and then his sort of early baby years. So it's very, and although I didn't read those poems, it's very, I don't know, emotional, I guess, to visit that state of vulnerability and anxiety that inspired those poems. My baby, though, who shows up in those poems, is now 11. And he's become an athlete, kind of a badass athlete, which is crazy to me. It's not crazy if you know his dad, but it is crazy if you know me. He's become a fencer, and I could not resist writing a couple of poems about his fencing life. So I'm going to read this one called Parent-Child Fencing Class. He, like many children of poets, he was not into team sports, and we took him to basketball and soccer and, you know, the others that you're supposed to bring your little child to. And he had really no interest in any of this. So I took him to a parent-child fencing class in Iowa City. So those of you who are in Iowa City, you should go take fencing with one of the best coaches in the world. She's still there and we're in contact. But we took this class together, and at the end of it, I asked him if he wanted to continue with me, and he said he was ready to go at it alone. He did not want to fence with his mom anymore. So I guess that's, you know, that's a part of growing up, is that you don't want to fence your mom anymore. Okay. Parent-child fencing class. Because I was too mean to make him a brother, my son has had to learn to hate alone. I told my friend I'd only ever wanted one child for reasons to do with the shape of an arrow, but in truth, I'm so disgusted by what I know of brothers. Having given birth to a son of Adam, I said, enough. One son is not a brother, he's just a person. I thought this could mean he would be free to indulge small pleasures like rubbing patterns in carpet under a piano and whistling without being followed, but it appears you can only turn cursive R's with your finger in the window alone in the back seat for so long before you need to stab someone in the hand with a real pencil. If you have no brother, that hand is yours. I'm talking here about the spirit, not the body. When I said hand, I meant your own soul will betray you. I meant by real pencil, earth's the right place for revenge because there's nothing in heaven like gravity or spit. And here I am suiting up to duel my brotherless child because it's time to drive the rage out of him into the tip of a sword he will try as pointlessly as war or poetry to touch my heart with. Given a brother, this struggle would be settled by wrestling near the sharp edge of something expensive. By withholding a brother from him, I have wrongly made this only a person believe the artifice of our house is the real love of him by the world. And now it's my duty to drag him backstage where any brother already would have pushed his face against the grill of a churning fan and forced him to tell the blades his name, to hear its syllables severed by the throbbing wind, which itself will be unplugged and rolled away at the end of the disappointing short run of a new play that will never be mounted again. I just strapped on a plastic chest plate that already has an impression of a pair of breasts in it. My sister was once a salesgirl at Victoria's Secret. She was issued a pink tape measure and tilted the three-way mirror to bring shoppers to understand quantum optics and Borges, adjusting the panels such that self-reflection could be monetized according to the proprietary algorithm that is the secret itself, sending American girls back out into the mall swinging their pink bags as if no one wants to shoot them. Next comes the one-armed coat, the plastron, enclosure that shares its name from chainmail with the undershell of a turtle into which I have seen oracular, indecipherable curses, as if into the final desk, desperately stabbed in response to such dull questions like, how many sheaves of wheat will my brother-in-law's upper field yield? Even the pyromancer must have grown to resent the court he served, and like the fire, unfulfilled, anxious to get onto something of more substance and drama, which is how boys get tricked out for war and epics, not by passion, but boredom. You've seen them standing around with nothing to do, so burning for action, they'll throw anything at anyone, can it, squirrel, snake it, girl. Their restlessness can be harnessed, suited up, and marched away. Beautiful, beautiful chainmail, like a coat of suicidal bubbles unsheathed by freelance squires, head first off the war debt along the bottom margin of the bayou tapestry, exposing each just a twisting line drawn in faded thread, naked or under the hooves of his own horse. Doesn't that chainmail, sold to someone else and someone else again, ring the dread of receiving one in a chain of so many letters it is your fate to copy by hand 10 times in the fevered scriptorium of late girlhood for further ongoing distribution everlasting to 10 more girls, all of whom will receive good luck if they just proceed themselves to copy it, if they just proceed to fold fold and envelopes, stamp, and will themselves to drop it in the blue mailbox. But the difficulty of making an initial list of 10 true friends on whom the luck of the rest could depend is the first step of many toward an emptiness that frees us. Parent-child fencing class meets in a converted warehouse, shares with stage and statecraft its elemental vernacular, obsessed like all of us with distance divided by speed, compelled to death by need and desire. The LA Times reports this morning, it took 11 hours to hand embroider the cotton poplin plastron, also called a dicky, the president of France wore to the American president's first state dinner. A false front, chainmail re-oblivion, symbolism akin to the reconfiguration of the ribs of the spring lamb they ate together into an interlocking saber arch position called by chefs a guard of honor. A grand dismantlement and reassembly of the rib cage around the hollow where the heart was into a diorama of predation named for how the ribs resemble now a double rack of upraised ceremonial swords into a long archway I once saw a bride and bridegroom walk out the chapel through into their marriage. It excited me to see the bride enter a tunnel of punishment and wonder like a romantic grown-up paddywhack machine. We were tailgating at West Point with family friends, not guests of the groom or bride, but of the public grass, when the last pair of the groom's brothers in arms crossed swords to block her path, and another of the guard of honor swatted her ass before they freed her, according to an old military tradition I did not anticipate, but internalized immediately. Humiliation did its job on me by proxy, and I was a woman. The air was so dense with wasps, my mother placed a decoy plate of our store-bought chicken nearby under a tree. I held a dishonorable family secret. No one knows how long I kept it. No one could shake it out of me. Now I have been fitted for something like a straitjacket and stepped into it. What a different confidence I am trussed in. Someone from behind up comes to zip me, lifting my hair so intimately. I can bend my foil into a steel rainbow. Such promise the world has, but now we must salute the apparent enemy and lower our masks. Am I satisfied? I'm not. Therefore, I advance up the strip, indifferently mythic, outfitted like a gentleman to teach my child the atrocity of etiquette. I think maybe the atrocity of etiquette is a summary of the long poem that I'm now working on. So I told you I was writing something about the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and you may have noticed that I do privilege the long poem in the world of the lyric. I'm really very drawn to the epic, and something about turning a page with a reader is this incredible community for me, that it's one thing to read a poem together or to be in a space like we are in the presence of a poem in the air. But it's quite another to have somebody read a book and actually with their hands turn the pages on a single poem. Something like that has to do with controlling someone else's body. And this seems to me some kind of incredible community dance to me. So I'm really drawn to the long poem, I think, as a reader, to be in community with a writer and having that sort of that movement in the body. And I know that sounds crazy because the lyric poem is in the body, it sits in the lungs and the diaphragm and the brain and the mind and the imagination anyway, but something about its relationship to narrative does something else with a dance, that's what I've been calling it. So I'm writing this long poem. It is a book-length poem. It has a few stops and starts, and those are places where I offer an invocation. This is a poem that takes place at the information desk at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, where I worked when I was in my 20s. I sat at that desk, which is sort of like almost like being inside of a donut, and answered questions. I have no training in art history. This was a job job that I got after applying to be a guard, and then and this was right after college, so you too can do this. I applied for this job, and I was told that there were no openings in the guard arena, but there were other jobs, visitor services, and did I want to look at some of those openings? And this was all in person. There were no online job ads. I was just there. So I ended up getting this incredibly life-changing job at this information desk. I love being in the presence of art and in curated spaces, but it was much more as a poet that this was important space to me. And I never became an art historian. I never became an artist. What I became was a poet. So this is something of a coming of age for me. As epics do, this poem also starts with and also has many sort of invocations along the way. In this age of misinformation and lies, my muse, who I opened this poem to, is somebody I think of as the patron saint of precision found in the natural world, and that's an insect called the jewel wasp that evolved a neurosurgical stinging capacity with a deadly sort of uncanny accuracy. It takes over the body of a cockroach. So this poem's muse is the jewel wasp, and then other wasps show up along the way. So I'm going to read Jewel Wasp. I'm going to go right into information desk and epic. And when I say epic, I'm kind of winking because I also think the notion of an epic in 2021 or whatever the hell year it is absurd and cocky. And it's just exactly that sort of hyperbole and attitude and strut that I feel like I needed to summon during certain recent years that we've all been suffering through. So you'll hear me read Jewel Wasp. I'll read from Information Desk, and then I'm going to end with a poem called The Oak Gall Wasp, which is a second invocation in the book. Okay. This is where I really wish I could make eye contact with you, but we'll do it this way. When the American cockroach lands on its back, trying to flick the glorious wasp off that moves like the hybrid of green tin and blue glass, gem tragic cerulean task, finite and fathomable as a photoshopped sea, the plan is already in full swing into the neurotransmitter primeval that drives the bidding of the now upended resolute legs of cockroach American, 6 times the size of the wasp and the color of a bottle of Budweiser, thrusts the neurosurgical stinger, the accuracy of which is neither hate nor love, but the beginning of the brief paralysis in which she needs to suspend the roach so unimpeded she can target a second cockroach ground zero in its roach ancient cockroach head. Do not fear mystery over precision. That's the mistake of children in bed whose abstract suspicions are dismissed. There was a jewel. Its name is Wasp. She flies off now to construct a specific nest. Do you think the roach is dead? There it stands, doing nothing when the wasp returns, drained from stinging, which you know kills dead the honeybees you dreamed of as a girl, that prompted you to pose your first questions to self as to sacrifice and valor. And so weary now, drags herself toward the roach, who makes no move to defend itself and bites off just one of the crisp antennae. Who among us has not been queried by, as I was once from a crack in a cabinet in a kitchen I was sharing with a friend whose ex I should not have slept with? Well, that was unexpected. I haven't thought that trespass through in a long time. Poems are as good a place for the past as the grass is for the wasp, whose iridescent face shines as she snaps the antenna off the cockroach and laps up the blood drink like the wasp goddess taught her in the vision whose street name, instinct, oversimplifies how satisfying I'm finding it to say cock as often as I've had the occasion to here. American cock in particular. I have good instincts. I always have. People never shock me, but I love to be taken by surprise, by loyalty, humility and candor, how I want the wasp to mount and ride the American cockroach now. But it will have to do to see the wasp use the one antenna the roach has left as a rein to steer it to the nest she made it, as a dutiful stallion of apocalypse is gently led back to its stall in hell. Yes, it will have to do for now, having soul hacked the American cockroach with the sting to the brain so precise as to make the roach stop roach identifying and give itself body and force zombie host to the wasp egg the wasp is laying inside it. Siblingless, starving born hatchling emerging in a few weeks' time by eating itself out of the moist gut of the living roach, who was led, as I said, not ridden by the wasp, no riding crop, no matriarch, giddy up, just a groom and a walk and a nest and an egg and a roach called cock. It is enough, but this is evolution and we've already come this far. Sorry, I forgot to warn you that this poem is a little bit dirty. There was a cart we used to transport brochures from a storage closet to the desk. You had to steer it back through the Renaissance into a passage that opened in a dark medieval hallway through a door without a handle you backed into after opening one-handed with a key called the number 2 that was hanging from a ball link chain around your neck. We talk a lot about death, my husband and I. I want to add to the utter absence of the weight that once seemed everlasting of the child asleep upon me that I can feel not feeling, which is the overtaking void circumscribed exactly, the pressure at my nape of the ball link chain when I bent down to insert the key and turn it, pushing the door open, and the glimmering insignificant beauty of the release of my neck as I withdrew key from lock, stood up and entered. My mother swam in a man-made body called the Delta Reservoir near the Mohawk River outside Rome, New York. That was the intentional result of the engineered flooding of a village called Delta that had been developed into something more than just acreage by 2 men named Stark and Prosper. You are an American girl. Here you are in an American poem, getting in the American water. Let's go under together. I used to get nosebleeds from the pressure. I don't know that I want to get in the poem. There is a ladder, itself a salvage. Let's back down it slowly, deep in the quiet American wing of the museum, in darkness toward a new closet, not for storage, but installed for public viewing, a woman's wardrobe. Private folded things, ironed, crisp as peeling an orange in sunlight, lit like a refrigerator in a dream with almost nothing in it. Who can stand before it and not divest? Stark and Prosper, starched and proper, stiff and angry, forced and entered, sorted and counted, stored and forgotten, a pull to bottom I associate with dream ending before awakening. Not thoughtless, beyond thinking, end of recording sound of the needle dragging the void. Why should we be afraid? Human consciousness far predates me, oiling the mahogany handrail with my mere presence. Rembrandt, not Rembrandt, 1995 was the first special exhibition I attended as museum employee. Paste it with the proprietary edge of a paid informant. Submit everything to the binary. It had the stiff infrared soul of connoisseurship. Rembrandt, not Rembrandt, that's the question. Posed it like a strobe with the typesetter's solidus, the forward slash, a force field between who did and who did not make it, without the indecisive human or Milton imposes between the given and the made. Eve withdrawing from Adam with such garden tools as are yet rude, guiltless of fire had formed, or angels brought. Choose a side, poet. Which is it, Eve or God who forged the hoe? Forgery, 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 flash, flash, flash. I said to myself, if you have to ask, but I stood before each painting, eating half shadow, umber, and ochre every day for a month of lunch hours, trying to know. The handling of the built-up impasto is itself a valid argument against, writes the curator, Walter Liedtke, in the exhibition catalog. Forgery, and yet a few paintings over, Portrait of a Man, the auctioneer. It is surprising how successful the unknown painter was at imitating Rembrandt's manner in the light effects of the sitter's left cuff. And so I came to love that cuff, its lace and dust, and loved the wrist that cuff suggests, obscured here in the painting by the ledger the auctioneer is holding, on which the trembling value of what? Some cows suggest a field in mind where a calf moves in the shadow of a barn, the hot smell of manure and mulch, a bull. How much is it all worth? Self-portrait of the young artist as auctioneer with your checklist and radiant left cuff that Rembrandt couldn't have better lit. I see you. I think I touched that cuff and more at a keg party in Sloanham Woods and sensed its tragic aptitude, counterpart to your dull right wrist lacking the vision of an artist's truth. Is that the word? Truth? Follower of Rembrandt, I followed you into the blue woods, but I changed my mind. There was a museum guard who would not leave me alone in the Rembrandt Not Rembrandt show. Like everyone, he used his brakes to flip through the large black binder of Better Jobs Human Resources left out on a table for us, and was eventually transferred to the Department of Design to walk the collection with a power drill tightening the lucite fixtures that held brochures. He was peculiar, and I was afraid of him. When he asked if he could sit beside me in the employees' cafeteria situated down a private access stairway beneath the small-scale models of a prosperous and tedious imagined hereafter, of a Middle Kingdom civil servant served by a labor force, of affectless miniature ghosts trapped in menial afterlives on boats, in gardens, slaughterhouses, cattle stables, and a cramped granary divided into two tight rooms, separating those hoisting sacks from scribal clerks squatting on the granary floor, recording each ounce of grain. I could not find my no. So down he put his tray, and we talked a while. He did something obscene, I don't remember what, with a red cherry tomato. 2 months later, he was let out of the museum on a date rape charge in cuffs, which seemed so new then, but as a phrase was coined in 1973, so technically is as old as me. We grew up together in the semi-finished basements of the suburbs, listening to the upstairs plumbing rush the shit of our fathers into the earth. Rembrandt, Not Rembrandt, was a show about the audacity of no. It either is or it isn't, Rembrandt or not. But we both know, though I have to say it, there can be truth without vision. Call it competence. You follow it out onto the ice with confidence, finding purchase on the surface and the boot ruts left by others, but it will never get me across a lake this size. My mother, a teenager more than half a century ago, on the telephone with a friend on a day like this, crystalline, indifferent, heard his little brother through the black receiver run panting into the house, yelling that a littler sister yet had broken through. The ice was a figure when I started that thought, but it transformed to ground, which is the beginning of disaster, as ground gives way to the natural transitions of the states of matter. In this case, just above the solidus, the temperature below which a given substance, lake water or my will, is solid. As a mark of punctuation, solidus descends toward us from the imperial Roman coin of nearly solid gold, also called a solidus, on the same downward spiraling staircase that brings sold to soldier, one who serves for pay. Such coins are on display today in Gallery 301, right outside the gift shop, but a debossed glass weight one could use to gauge debasement is too far away to help debate the worth. Did you consent in basements? Yes, no, circle one. I didn't know. And under the information desk, did you know? I would now, but I didn't how so long ago. Rembrandt, 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 not. From slurry to slip and back we go. Stand up, visitor, this is your hour. Here is your map. Choose your cradle. Ancient Egypt to the right, ancient Greece to the left, as the crow flies, if the crow flew, but construction obstructs its course, so you'll see it strutting around, lost, making self-important calls at the temporary walls of empire. What do I mean, crow? The boy from SVA, the tourist, the teacher, the dramaturg, schoolgirl to whom the world has given such a small skirt and such a tall, cold stool. Who converges in the great hall with me today? Sometimes I work the lines, handing out floor plans just to get out from inside the fact, but information is a movable desk. John F. Kennedy Jr. asked me late one afternoon, "What time is it?" And I had to tell him, "Not much left now. We were closing soon." He stood there, throbbing like a metaphor, son of the 20th century whose vehicle was powered by props. The great poet once admonished me, "You are reducing history to anecdote. That's more than you ever did. Stop raising it up to myth." I would have liked to have stood in front of Washington crossing the Delaware, holding John by the hand and told him, "I once saw it carved in a grain of rice." Afterward, I tucked the Stoic in 80 yards of wine dark imported European textile in the low down bed in gallery 709, salute good night, medieval America, and close the high post night curtain. In this lucid state of poem, I admit I'm having trouble envisioning the age of John, mother or liaison, boy or man, Thomas Hart, whose bed we're in, arrived on this land on a ship named Desire. Who would identify with the mother country or Dow or country mother variety of Massachusetts witch, living apron she who used her hands to wipe her hands on, practical Ipswich wife to whom this bed was left and this home willed father to son out from under her? Lying on the bed, I can feel the room's dependency, its depth, a percussive loyalty stomping out of fire. And with a little reach, I can use my foot to twitch the awful oaken 4 centuries old cradle situated beside me. Imagine the oak tree overcoming the acorn tragic hunger hoarded by a rodent. Every tree is an exception. The sturdy wood has the self-regarding gloss of old cabinetry turned in anger, contrived squarely in defiance in the proportions of a coffin. Worse, the so-called cradle has a hood that leans a shadow on the empty. Every child thrives at the expense of someone else's. Though this is just a poem on the subject of exhibition, a double-blind protection from statistics, here I sing to John inside the cradle, inside this primary period, inside the period rooms, inside the American wing, inside this museum. I am mothering a small man, wifing a tremendous potential child, ovulating in the period room and full of it. Lust, avarice, spite, destiny, dynasty, lice. John Kennedy Jr. wants to know what time it is. That's the 20th century behind you, child man. You can hide inside my skirt, but it's a mini. What's coming's coming for you from the sky. There's a luminous noonday shine on the information desk, but it's artifice. The trustee's dining room glows above like an expensive minor afterlife. This morning I awoke to pounding deluge, a furious heavenly manual typing outside my window that turned out to be just ice on the roof thawing, but I still call that rain from a lower ceiling than I thought, and I can lower my thinking yet to the museum sub-basement where rats mount a rotating permanent exhibition of excrement among the white marble B-side nudes and dated marble satyrs that may or may not ever see restoration or be seen above again. And I think I'll stop there and read you one more invocation, this to the gall wasp, who is an amazing wasp that's in your backyard right now. They're very tiny and they lay their eggs inside oak trees, and then the magic happens. Invocation to the oak gall wasp. Something like a wooden pearl. What gall forms here? Irritation's gemstone on the oak leaf underneath, I thought was a berry seed case or oak-faced scrotum-like excrescence the oak tree seemed to make of itself in extremis, involved with power. For no reason when we were girls, plucking these woodland BBs from the branch to flick at the back fence, about so much unsuspecting I was mistaken by dissemination, meticulously more single-minded than the mere widest distribution of seed over the furthest expanse as I follow American history, small and solitary, intravenously driven living syringe, mainlined into the green vein of oak leaf to position with the earthly pulse of her otherworldly self-sufficient piercing ovipositor, her shimmering eggs. The oak gall wasp is un-American, mother of the year. Patriotism Meet parasitism. A biochemical je ne sais quoi charms the redirection of the oak leaf's force to form a cradle for each minuscule egg, something like the way our human flesh scabs over. And not just any oak. Oak gall wasps overtaking an oak known as your own are implicit in every acorn, including the sprouting one you carried home rolling slowly around the base of a wet Dixie cup your first grade teacher told you would, with patience, be as tall as you one day and capable in time of crushing you in bed on the sentimental consequence of gravity, which is a consequence of the curvature of space-time. But what isn't? I sold the house behind which my son and I once planted such an acorn and even enclosed it in a pathetic ring of prefabricated fencing. I fought counterclockwise against the coil to unspool off a metal roll like a robot fabric bolt to shield it from the orphan fawns. If that oak rises still, witness to the sleep of someone else's child through an underestimated August storm, I do not know or in what health, but if rise it does, safe in her hyperbaric chamber, as some athletes sleep between stages on the Tour de France, there the gall wasp grows in my divestment. Such a fundamental hunger stirs in the oak gall dark. If you listen, you might hear her chew her way out of oak leaf, where she incubates encrypted in her first meal. Unless, and this is life on earth, as much a miracle of drudgery and lust as you or me or the gall wasp, another even more strategic parasitic to the second power brood parasite wasp, oak injects with finer, more exacting ovipositor, a second egg, the two sister together in the wasp world prenatal ritual juices, downloading the vital redirected principles of oak into their maturing, crackling bodies. You've been to sleepovers. Girls grow strong, touching each other's bodies with stories of mutual incrimination. What confidence betrayed then when duplicitous behind her back? To emerge, as we learned, wasps chew their exit through the gall. But in the case of a hosting wasp, she's compelled to stop by something that most entomologists don't read enough Victorian novels to understand. Whether social dynamics are more or less legible to an outsider, I'm too far inside the gall to tell, since it was I who dug the hole, placed the acorn, shooed the beast, and waited for the oak to leaf that the gall wasp could deposit there her egg, inspiring thus the oak to cradle it that a second wasp could parasitize the parasite wasp, as is drawn out over several seasons of elaborate outmaneuverings in parish, parlor, and palace on the BBC. But this is an American transition of power. Don't look away. I don't want to end this poem bleeding, but the wasp does eat the wasp, and up through the top of her head, like the goddess she is, enters the hellscape. It's happening now. It happened. Unless that is through the bedroom window where sleeps the child of someone else now, the beautiful oak I tenderly tended already crashed. And I think that's where I'll stop tonight. Thank you so much for being here and for listening. There's a serious reason why poetry is not on TV, because it's really much better done together. But thank you for this accommodation in these horrible times we live in. Sandy, I'm so happy to see you again. I was just going to keep talking until you appeared.
That was incredible, Robyn.
Thank
When
you.
is your book going to come out? I can't wait to read the whole book.
Thank you. March of 23, as every phase of the pandemic. Well, first I moved. It was slated much sooner, and then I left my home and moved to my new home, and that slowed me down. And then I changed it to, and then a pandemic came, and it did what it did. And I was very lucky, but not in the poem sense during the pandemic. I have been lucky, and so now it's slated for early in the year of 23. Thank you for asking.
Oh, I can't wait. All right, we already have some questions here. Let's see. Yeah, so okay, while I'm reading this, you all, if you have questions, you can just type it into the Q&A part, and Robyn and I should both be able to see it, and I'll read them
Yeah.
aloud. All right, so Matthew says, in the first poem, the line in reference to a hunter's mimicked fawn sound, calling both doe in hopes of comforting their baby and bucks in lust of the concerned doe, is really insightful and reveals this corruption to nature that stuck with me. What is your process when approaching these dichotomies and perspective shifts in establishing an exposition?
Thank you for this rich question. I'm not sure I have a process so much as just, as I guess, a sensitivity to the beauty and cruelty of human and animal life. And we are animals, and just sort of thinking about ourselves and thinking about how we fit into the larger natural world stirs me. But in both ways, both in ways that make me sympathize and identify with animals, and ways that also scare and shock me. Some of my earliest, like, I love bugs, but as you now know, some of my earliest bug memories were being afraid or repulsed. And I would say, like, ew, what an ugly spider. And my mother said, it's not ugly to its mother. And I was like, she's right. And I feel like, she was just never dismissive, and always made me think about something. So I appreciate that.
Matthew has a follow-up question. You had mentioned the ability to turn a page in a longer poem, offering a sort of control over the mind and emotion as the reader is given the opportunity, or the lack of one, to contemplate before continuing, or being forced to act upon the pages and make an effort to keep reading. Do you place stanzas, lines, or words on particular pages or in between them in efforts to convey a sense of urgency, mystery, or other emotion? Do you have an example of this process? If you do, or an example of its effects that you've been able to witness from your own readers?
No, I don't have control or any interest really in persuading, or working with book designers and how things end up on the page. I work sometimes handwriting, but usually typing. So the idea of page sort of is strange, but I will say that as I am a book editor also, and I'm not the designer, but our designer, who is the incredible poet and publisher, Joshua Edwards, he works really closely with a lot of poets who have the kinds of concerns that you're talking about, some who don't want a poem to end in a certain place, or who place things in the page or on the field, as we say, in different places. So there definitely are poets who are in conversation with their designers in, I think, really meaningful and emotive ways. I'm much more interested in, I think, the one thing you didn't mention, and that's the relationship between sentence and line, and sentence and stanza. So that control, exactly what you're talking about, and instead of it, and I do love the turn of the page, because that's where, the reader can throw the book away or whatever. Like, that's where you lose them, but that's it's exciting. There's something very intimate of touch, that's also where you get them, right, too. But for me, the writing process part of that is actually the stanza break. I very, 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 very rarely end stop a stanza. It gives me a lot of anxiety to, as you can see, to stop talking at all, but to stop talking at the end of where closure is supposed to be, stanza by stanza. So when I do it, if it scares me in a good way, I let it hang. But usually, I'm looking through my book now, they're usually jammed. There's usually what I call a lot of traffic. And it's that navigation through the silence that is the white space on the page that brings in a lot of the unsaid, the ghost, the opposite of what saying is, the sort of the negative positive quality of, like, having written. There's the part that you haven't written. So I guess I'll end there.
A shorter question. What's the poem that changed your life?
I want to answer this so well. Marion Moore's poem, no pressure, but Marion Moore's poem, No Swan So Fine.
That's awesome. Are there any poetry books that you recommend?
Yeah. I have two sitting on my desk. I love Amy Gersler's new book, Index of Women. I love Camille Guthrie's new book, Diamonds. I love this very strange, wonderful book called El Dorado Freddy's Chain Restaurants in Poems and Photographs. This is really great. I recommend Sandy Meek's books, but you've read them, you live there. Nikki Walschlager is an amazing poet. David Trinidad is an amazing poet. Jericho Brown, my wonderful colleague, is an extraordinary poet. That's a list.
That is fabulous. Are there any more questions here? We are working on getting the link up for you all, but we have another couple of minutes for questions if anyone has them. Robyn, can you tell us a little bit more about why that particular Marianne Moore poem was the one for you?
Yeah, I'd been assigned, and I'd been reading poems for a long time, like since I was a child. But when I was in college, I took a class that was really important to me with a professor named Suzanne Hoover at Sarah Lawrence, where I went to undergraduate. And we like every other writing English class. This wasn't a writing class, it was a straight up English class, but we studied the sonnet. And then at the end of the semester, we were asked to pick a sonnet and talk about it and all of this. And I was like defiant. And I was like, maybe this is a sonnet. I don't know. It's 14 lines. I don't know. And I'd never been asked, I think, to scrutinize a poem quite like Professor Hoover asked me to. And I really didn't understand the poem. It was inscrutable to me. And I loved Marianne Moore, who I had discovered for myself the year prior. She was not read, to my knowledge, in the United States at that time, but I found her when I did a junior year abroad, and I found her in a bookstore in Oxford, England, and fell in love. Like I never went back, still love her. And something about that work was just, I don't know, it gave me sisterhood or something.
Yeah. Well, I think we need to stop there because we are at time. We have another place to be for a class session. So the link should be posted there for anybody who needs that to click on. So go ahead and do that if you need that. Robyn, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank
so
you for this
fabulous.
forum, and it's wonderful to just be in your presence. And I'll see you in the other room in a minute. Bye.
Bye, everybody. Thank you for coming.